you could just, I don't want any feedback, so it's probably not a good idea to look at YouTube on feedback. Would you just welcome anybody that's watching?
Okay, so I'd like to welcome anybody watching today to our meeting talking about socialism from a Marxist point of view. We're a group of Marxists. This is an opportunity for people from different backgrounds to discuss the pressing need for a new mass socialist communist party. I'd like to thank everybody who's attended, both online and in person, and hope it'll be the first of many meetings of this kind. My name's Soraya Lawrence, and I'll be facilitating the first session today, which will be introduced by Nick Rack, who will introduce for about 30 minutes or so, and then we'll open up for discussion.
Well, comrades, thank you very much to Soraya, and there's a small group of us here in Manchester, so I'd like to thank comrades for coming in person to the meeting. I know it's a long way to come from around the country to Manchester. I hope some people are watching on the live stream, and this video will be up on YouTube for people to watch. And if you are watching now or later after the meeting's finished, please press the subscribe button so that you can subscribe to other videos and get notifications about talking about socialism. The reason that we've called this meeting is that our small group of Marxists talking about socialism from a Marxist point of view is really organized around a central theme, a central aim, and that is to try to work with others to form the basis, the nucleus of what we think is the most pressing need in Britain and internationally, and that is the creation of a mass, democratic, working class party that is committed to the idea of abolishing capitalism and inaugurating a new society that we call socialism or communism. I'm not going to go into facts and figures in this meeting because people watching will be familiar with the detail of the growing inequality between the ruling class, the billionaire oligarchs internationally who own the means of production. By means of production, I mean the land, the minerals, the waters, the factories, the transport, the science and the technology. They are owned and controlled by a small class of capitalists, and their system depend upon the exploitation of the working class, who they employ and who produce surplus value, and that is the basis for their profit. We want a system in which the means of production are owned in common, democratically owned and planned, run and managed by the working class and ultimately by the whole of society. The reason that we want to end this system can be seen in any aspect of society that you want to look at, whether it is the growing inequality, the massive, obscene wealth that those oligarchs, those capitalists have, compared with the living standards of ordinary working class people and the oppressed masses internationally. Not just in what might be called the global south, or used to be called the third world, not just in the underdeveloped countries where people don't have access to clean water or safe sanitation, or women can't give childbirth safely. Even in the advanced capitalist countries, you take America, where the focus has been recently with the election of Donald Trump for the second time, you can see there that in the most powerful, leading capitalist country in the world, Huge sections of the working class cannot earn enough money to survive from 1 week to the next, from 1 month to the next, essentially a paycheck or two away from destitution. Capitalism can't provide the basic necessities of life. So even in Britain, we have now a water crisis. After all of the gains of the post-war settlement after the Second World War, with the welfare state, the post-war settlement, sometimes known as the mixed economy, with nationalisation and the provision of healthcare and education, most of those gains are being or have been taken away. They're under constant threat. So we have the situation now in Britain that children go to school hungry because their parents can't give them breakfast. Millions of families exist on food banks. People can't get dental treatment because dentists are not taking national health patients. And every single section or sector of society that we look at, you can see that the gains that have been made in the past through working class struggle, organisation, fighting for those reforms are being undermined. That is the nature of capitalism. The capitalist class in Britain and internationally is trying to take us back, not just to the pre-Second World War period, but to the Victorian period, without any social welfare, without any safety net. And so it calls into question, what is it that we need to do in order to stop that and to abolish the system that causes that? And that's why we think that these discussions about the need for a new party are so important. It's a situation that is crying out for an alternative. I want to say at the beginning that when we get groups of Marxists together, and each Marxist or group of Marxists will have come from their own tradition, their own background, their own political education in one group or another, that there will be lots of differences. Sometimes they're important differences, and sometimes they are not. Sometimes they're secondary or even tertiary differences. We don't necessarily even agree on what words mean. So, what do we mean by socialism? What do we mean by communism? There's all sorts of other words in the vocabulary about which there may be disagreements. And when we use those words, there may be misunderstanding, because one person can mean a word in one sense and another person will understand it in an entirely different way. Those of us in the small group of talking about socialism are of the opinion that the words socialism and communism and the words socialist and communist mean the same thing. Socialism and communism, in our opinion, following Marx and Engels, is a society that is achieved after capitalism has been abolished, after a period in which the working class has come to power and organised a new state, and after that state has disappeared or withered away, and we are left with a society without a state, without classes, a society in which production is organised democratically for the benefit of all, the protection of the planet upon which we depend, the protection of nature of which we're a part, and not for the profit of a few. Everybody will work according to their ability, and everybody will contribute according to their ability. And in a society where everybody works and there are no owners, there'll be no classes. So that's what we mean by socialism or communism. And again, both words are being distorted or perverted or misrepresented in theory and in deed. If we take the idea of communism, which in my opinion is perhaps the most profound idea in human history, the idea of changing society in the interest of humanity, communism has been distorted by the experience of Stalinism, what existed in the Soviet Union, or its satellite states, or China, or anywhere else of those types of societies, in our opinion, was not communism. Communism would not have a state. Communism would be completely democratic. Communism would not need to imprison its population and prevent them from traveling. Those societies have nothing whatsoever in common with the ideas of communism as argued, set out by Marx, by Engels and other communists who follow in their footsteps. So in a sense, we have to rescue the idea of communism from that legacy and explain it afresh, explain what it really means. The same goes for the word socialism or socialist. Because socialism, when Marx and Engels wrote, it meant the same thing. You can look at Engels' popularizing of Marx's work in Socialism, Utopian and Scientific. You can see that he's talking about a socialist society, which is essentially the communist society. And he's explaining how that might arise and what it would entail. But of course, the differences within the socialist movement, or there have always been differences within the socialist and communist movement, even going back to when Marx and Engels wrote the Communist Manifesto in 1847, published in 1848. There's a section in that which deals with other types of socialism, other types of communism. And he criticizes those other types, what he calls utopian or bourgeois or reactionary. And so there have always been different movements within the workers' movement which have claimed adherence to particular ideas of socialism or communism, which are different from those ideas as set out by Marx, which we adhere to and think are what is required. The main split that continues to this day, if you like, among socialists is between those people who see socialism in the way that I've set it out, and we have to accept that this is a minority in the labour movement, it's a minority now in the working class, but those socialists who see socialism as a form that supersedes capitalism is one strand, and we think that that's what's got to become the majority strand. And there's another strand which I'm going to call social democratic or reformist, and that is those who call themselves socialist, but actually what their aim is to manage capitalism. And their aim doesn't go beyond that. And if you look at the various reformists in the labour movement, whether of the right, who really are completely pro-capitalist and overtly pro-capitalist and defend that overtly, and the left reformists who perhaps use language of socialism, but actually in practice their programme is what I would say is an illusion, a utopian delusion, the idea that capitalism can be managed by a socialist government. There's an oxymoron there, because they've been managing a system which is alien to the interests of the working class. Any working class party that seeks to manage capitalism will end up doing what capitalism dictates, what the capitalist market insists upon, and that is what the capitalist class wants. Of course, there are differences within the capitalist class, and there may be arguments, there might be different strategies within the ruling class. Some will say we need to go hard on the working class. Others might say, no, we need to give some concessions. We don't want to risk losing everything. And the Social Democrats have the view that they can go into government and that they can run society without fundamentally changing society, but they can run it in the interests of the working class. But you only need to think about what the system is to realize that that is an impossibility. Capitalism is a system that is based, as I've already said, on the ownership of the means of production by a small group of capitalist owners who make their profit from the exploitation of the working class. And they do that essentially by employing the working class at an agreed level, on an agreed wage, but the workers make value far in excess of that wage. And so long as you have that system, you are going to keep getting the recreation or the extension of that inequality. You can tax the capitalist class as much as you want, but the capitalist class will still be there. It will still be exploiting labor for profit, and it will still be getting richer and richer at the expense of the working class. So the working class is left in the workplace, in the home, whether it's looking for housing, whether it's trying to get education or health. It's constantly, in every aspect of its collective life, facing struggle, facing a fight against its very existence. We want to change in the way that society is organized so that that daily, weekly, monthly, annual struggle that is forced on the working class from every single aspect, beginning in the workplace and exploitation in the workplace, so that is removed forever. And that we have a society where the need for struggle, the need for fight disappears. Now, how is that going to happen? How do we get to that? Well, in the working class movement, we need to be clear about what our aims and aspirations are. What is our ultimate goal? Our ultimate goal, in our opinion, is the abolition of capitalism. It's the expropriation of the capitalist class, as set out in the Communist Manifesto all those years ago. That's something that is consistently ignored, the property question. So we have the Social Democrats who argue that what we need is partial nationalisation. We need some sort of welfare state, some sort of support network, and essentially that's the extent of their arguments. Nationalisation under the Labour government was nationalisation in the interests of the capitalist economy, of the capitalist class. Those industries were not run by the working class in the interests of the working class. It was conceded really in the aftermath of World War II in order to prevent the extension of revolution in the period following the end of the war. And the capitalist class in Britain and elsewhere largely went along with it because they saw that it was a necessary concession to make. But we've seen since the 1980s, particularly mid-1970s, the erosion of all of those, if you want, those advances, the undermining of all of the reforms and the concessions, bit by bit, some fast, some slow, but they're all being removed. And what we've seen over the last 40 years is a period not of reforms, but of counter-reforms. And they are going to accelerate. You only need to look at Trump's project for America to see where they intend to go. The same will happen here in Britain. Now, we're here to discuss the need for a new socialist or communist party. In Britain, and probably across the globe, there are all sorts of discussions taking place about this very subject. A lot of it derives or rises out of the present conditions, as I've set out in general, not just in terms of economic crisis, the inequality, the austerity, but also the wars that are caused by capitalism. And until we get rid of capitalism, we will not get rid of the cause of war. And also, extremely pressing now, if people didn't believe it, then maybe they are looking at Spain and realizing that there's something in the idea of climate catastrophe, that global warming is a real thing, and that capitalism will do nothing to stop it, because for them, profit comes first. It comes before the ecology, before the planet, and before the people whose lives will be ruined either through death or destruction. And so all of these things are forcing people to confront the question, what are we going to do? How are we going to survive? What are our children going to do? What's the planet going to be like for our grandchildren? And our answer to that is, if capitalism continues, there's no protection. We need to fight for a fundamental break with the capitalist system. So that's a large part that is motivating the discussions around how do we change society? Do we need a party? What sort of party? The other, in Britain, more immediate reason perhaps is the experience of the Corbyn movement from 2015 to 2019 in the Labour Party, which clearly mobilised a huge layer of Labour movement activists, of liberal-minded people, of people who would call themselves socialists. Something like, what, 300,000, 350,000 people joined the Labour Party under Corbyn. But we can see the defeat of Corbyn was predicated by Corbyn's own political programmatic inadequacies. The programme of Jeremy Corbyn, which is now supported by all sorts of groups that proliferate on Facebook and elsewhere, calling for essentially the rebuilding of Corbynism outside of the Labour Party, because they're groping towards, they want an alternative, and that's the sort of the easiest thing for them to grapple with or to grasp, and you take that out of the cupboard because we've got that one already, and we'll build around that. But if you look at the experience of Corbyn in opposition from 2015 to 2019, and you see the programme, it wasn't even as radical as the social democratic reformist programme of Tony Benn and the alternative economic strategy of the Tribune Group in the 1970s and the 1980s. Very little call for nationalisation. What nationalisation there would be in a capitalist economy. In the manifesto, you still had support for NATO, you still had support for nuclear weapons. You had John MacDonald's idea that you would have workers' representatives on the board of directors, essentially arguing for the incorporation of workers in deciding how best to exploit themselves. The ideas of social democracy do not have the ability to withstand the attacks of the capitalist class. And we saw in Corbyn his retreat under the barrage of the fake accusations of anti-Semitism. He essentially capitulated to that and sacked some of his own allies for allegations of anti-Semitism which were largely incorrect, unfounded. And we see where that has taken us now with the lies that preponderates around the world. The most recent example perhaps being the events in Amsterdam a few days ago, which completely lies, events turned back to front. It reminded me of the Orgreave event in the miners' strike of 40 years ago, where you might remember that the TV news reversed the order of event, so it looked like the miners had charged the police rather than the other way around. It didn't come out for years. That was not accepted. Perhaps even worse than the limited programme of Jeremy Corbyn is the fact that Corbyn's been out of leadership of the Labour Party now for, what, 4 years? And in that period, notwithstanding the clamour by tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people for him to do something, to create a new party, to continue his project, he has simply refused to do anything. He's attended a few meetings and he's apparently poo-pooed or suppressed the idea of creating anything new. And there are other forces in that political milieu who are intent, it would seem, in creating something new. And if something new does come about, then that will be an organisational advance, and it's something in which Marxists would have to engage with in terms of debating ideas and so on. But trying to organise around the programme of Jeremy Corbyn or around the ideas of left reformers, social democracy, essentially is creating a party to do what 120 years of the Labour Party couldn't do. It's simply trying to recreate a vehicle to manage capitalism in the illusion, the idea, the mad idea, in my opinion, that you can manage capitalism better than the capitalists. If you want to make the economy work as a capitalist economy, you would have to do what is in the interests of the bosses. You would have to cut corporation tax. You would have to limit the ability of workers to struggle and to strike. You would have to reduce the size of the state. And no matter how much it's dressed up, that's what Labour governments have done repeatedly, and particularly in the last, under Tony Blair and then Gordon Brown. And so for us as Marxists, for socialists, for communists, people who argue that we need a fundamental break with capitalism, the idea of creating a new party simply to manage capitalism is a non-starter. It will happen. I've got no doubt about it. It will happen. But that is not the party that we are arguing for. A party should bring together people who have a shared objective, a shared goal. So what is our goal? Our goal is the new society. Our goal is the idea of common ownership, democratic planning for need, not profit. And we should organise all those who agree with that proposition should discuss together how it can be attained and whether it's possible, we believe it is, to create a party that brings all of those forces together. Those who don't agree with us, well, they obviously will decide for themselves what they will do. But let's say they should form their own party. That party's aims, it seems to us, would be to manage capitalism, however much of a left or a liberal take on it, however it's presented. And therefore, we've got different objectives. We want to concentrate, or we should concentrate, on building the party that has its ultimate goal of changing society, of getting rid of the capitalist class, of expropriating its wealth and its ownership, and creating the new society. Now, that does not mean that we are just abstract propagandists. Marxists, socialists, communists, whatever term you want to use, are members of the working class. We are activists in the working class. We need to participate in every struggle that advances the cause of the working class, defensive or offensive. We need to be involved in the movement against climate change. We need to be involved in anti-war protests. We need to be involved in the arguments about Gaza and the Middle East and so on. But it's not enough simply to be an activist. What we need to do is be an activist with an idea, with an aim. So we're intervening and participating and helping to build these struggles, but linking it to the idea of a new society. Because otherwise, we're just running around giving support, giving strength, giving solidarity, but without anything to come after that. What happens if, for example, the war in Gaza comes to a termination and the protests end? So long as capitalism still exists, so long as America still is the most powerful country in the world, so long as Israel and the Zionist state of Israel continues to exploit, those problems will be there, ready to resurge again. So we need to link the present day struggles to the fight for a new future society. Now, just going to make a few final comments. I haven't at all been able to touch on many of the points that I wanted to raise, and hopefully they'll come up in the discussion. The party that we're seeking to build with others, first of all, as I said at the beginning, we recognise that it's bringing people together from different traditions. So we have to be serious. We have to understand that people will say things that we don't agree with. So long as there is a shared agreement about the common objective, that should not be a reason for walking away. The left, the socialist left, the communist left, the Trotskyist left, whatever you want to look at, is prone to splits, vociferous nature of the left. Not necessarily arguing or splitting over matters of importance, but over secondary issues, tactical issues even, maybe even pedagogical issues, maybe even the way that you put forward a slogan. Or you might have arguments about what was the class nature of the Soviet Union. You might have an argument about what is the real cause of capitalist crisis. Is it underconsumptionism, or is it the tendency for the rate of profit to fall? In our opinion, all of those arguments should be in the same party, strengthening the understanding of the party and therefore of the working class. We have the debates and the differences in public so that the working class can see what we're debating, can follow the arguments. The idea, frankly, that in the third decade of the 21st century, where every single thing that is done appears on social media, whether it's Twitter, X, or TikTok, or whatever, everything, the idea that you can keep internal differences hidden from the class is utterly, utterly preposterous. And we shouldn't even try to do it. So we need to be completely democratic. Final point, cutting things shortly. Well, why a new party? Why not one of the existing parties? Well, it's a very good question. In my opinion, and I leave it open for other people to express theirs, most of the organisations, if not all of the organisations that one could look at, are, in my opinion, organised on an undemocratic basis. So it's not democratic centralism, it's centralism. And also, for the most part, have a different perspective about how society will be changed. Our opinion is set out in our Talking About Socialism statement, who we are and the ideas that guide us, which you can find on our website. The ideas that we adhere to are that the fundamental change, the fundamental break with capitalism that we require will be a mass movement of the working class. It will be the most democratic event in history. It won't be achieved by a small party of 2,000 or 20,000 or even 200,000. It requires a party of millions, of many millions. It requires a party that can have MPs elected, that can have representatives elected. So we would stand in elections using it as a platform using as a way of arguing. We need a party that has got members in every workplace, in every school, in every college, in every street, in every estate. It sounds grand, it is. It sounds ridiculous. Well, that's what we need. So the question is, how do we get from here to there? So we need serious people. We would like it if the leaders and the members of the existing socialist or Marxist or revolutionary organisations took the initiative, such as happened after the First World War in Britain, when different organisations came together and created the Communist Party of Great Britain. I've got no illusions that that's going to happen, unfortunately. But that's what should happen, and I think that's what we should call for. So if we want a party with the idea of creating a mass party that wants to draw in working class people, wants to educate them about socialism, and that party be democratic, then we need to get together and we need to discuss in detail how we're going to do it and how we're going to go from the small forces. We have to recognize we are a minority of a minority of a minority. How we go about it. And however hard it is, it's what's necessary. So my watchword, or my phrase, if you like, is patient urgency. We need this urgently, but it's going to take patience and hard work to achieve it. So look forward to questions, disagreements, contradictions, and thank you very much.
Thanks, Nick. And open it up from the floor. Any comments, questions? The only way we can begin this is by beginning the discussion, no matter how many there are at the beginning. We don't claim, as talking about socialism, to be even the beginning of this, but we want to be a part of the process. And as Nick said, for Marxists and Socialists from all sorts of backgrounds to come together to begin the argument for a mass socialist communist party, for a new mass workers' party. So, anybody want to jump in? I know that there's somebody here who's got to leave. Yes, because I know you've got to leave quite soon. So do.
Thanks for that. Yes.
Can I just? I'm sorry to interrupt. Do people mind if I put the camera on them while they're speaking, or?
I can live with that.
Okay, so what? If you just hold on a second.
Can I put my mask on?
Just you tell me when Chris is in line. Oh.
Yeah, that's it. Great. Yeah. Thanks.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, it's very hard to respond to such a lengthy thing so quickly, so I want to just pick up several effectively isolated points rather than collective response. First of all, very early on, you referred to groups of Marxists coming together. Very much something that happened in the 90s around the network of socialist alliances and the Socialist Alliance, where the bulk of the larger left groups did, to a greater or lesser extent, sit in the same place for 12 months or so. I think that's a wrong starting point in a very important way. Not that those groups aren't important, that's not what I mean, but there are now much larger layers of people who have not gone through the experience of socialist groups. Very different from the situation that there was, when I was first an activist in the 70s and the 80s, where a lot of the struggle was taken through various Marxist socialist organisations. So there are now much more broader networks. People sometimes just single issue, sometimes straight anti-capitalists, but doing one thing. So I think one of the questions that any future organisation's got to address is how it does relate to those people and how they see it, how they see the class struggle. That was the first point. The second one, I think, I said there was separate points, now they're separate. You did say a number of reasons why you thought Corbyn had failed, was weak and whatever. I agree with that you made, but I think one thing that rarely gets commented on, which to me was very important at that time, and still is that there was not a mass movement on which something more radical could base itself, or a mass movement that could defend something more radical. I think Corbyn became the leader of the Labour Party by a bizarre accident of the electoral rule, and the fact there were several hundred thousand, largely younger people, who were willing to fork out a few quid to vote in the election, but were not collectively organised a lot of the time. Rarely, if ever, in reality, joined the Labour Party. And so there was an expression, we need change, coming through that vote, but it wasn't borne out by anything on that scale of the participants in it. And of course, I say these are separating points. That does to some extent relate back to my first point, which is there are large numbers of people who've got a different view, maybe not revolutionary Marxist, Socialist, however you want to go, that are very much questioning the society, and I think that is a target area where we've got to go to. Final point is, I do think we have to be more detailed about what we mean by socialism. I mean, I'm actually very reluctant these days to use the word socialism, taking your point about communism, socialism, and not use the word eco-socialism. Because I think there is a shift in the nature of socialism to the way that Lenin or Trotsky or whoever might have understood it decades ago, which was more production, overcoming poverty, more production. There is an awareness now of the limitations of how the globe can be exploited for human needs, and that needs to be very heavily recognised. It also has to be, what you mean by socialism has to be clarified in another way, around how it relates to women's liberation, black liberation, all those sort of sometimes are dismissively, I think wrongly referred to as identity politics. We need to be very overt about how socialism incorporates those sectors who might be mobilised entirely around their issues as trans people or women or black or whatever, who are only beginning perhaps to make links with the more traditional workers' movements. So I think we have to be clear that we see them as in. And the reason why that's worth saying at this time is that there is a growing sentiment of people who've got this almost old white men factory concept of the working class, and are really, I think, getting what they mean by working class upside down and wrong. Last point, and possibly a difficult one, and that is the situation that's arisen politically over the last, well, something to the last 2 or 3 decades, which has been a tendency of socialists, because they are rightly opposed to NATO and want to defeat NATO, taking very questionable stances on the situation in various countries. The strongest one at the moment is obviously Ukraine, where there has been a complete unwillingness by most of the British left to try and make links with and stand with the organised working class trade union and socialist movement in Ukraine, because they are so correctly wanting to fight against NATO that they can't see where the starting place of our international solidarity is not which bunch of rival imperialists we think is better or worse in a particular country, but actually what does the working class movement in that country want, and how do we solidify with it? Now, some of these, I think, are primary questions, some of them are secondary, and I think your point about the debate should be within the party is right in a very broad sense, I accept that. But some of these are going to be quite difficult, I think, in the near future in terms of identifying where we are, because there are so many diverse pressures, new organisations, new projects, and they're pinning themselves sometimes quite distinctly differently on some pretty important questions. Thanks. I'm sorry for having to then shoot out the door.
No, it's much appreciated.
Thank you very much.
Can I just, I'm just going to take the opportunity at this point just to switch the microphones if we can, just because comrades who are watching online are struggling to hear us through the microphone that we have.
See you at the end of the dinner break.
Thank you very
See you,
much.
Chris. I think they really can't hear the camera. Can you end that screen window? Yeah. So, comrades watching online, what we're going to do is we're just going to end this stream and then start again, hopefully with the same link, but with a new microphone, and then hopefully you'll be able to hear. So we'll end there, and hopefully we'll be back in a minute.
Do you?